Good morning. It is September 5th, 2023, 16 minutes past the hour. Last night, we picked up this little autobiography by Charles Welch, and I started reading it to you guys. And at first, I thought it was going to be pretty hard, pretty lousy to read. Where's he going with this? But the more I read, the more I started getting into it. So I was enjoying it. We got up to about page 40 and I pooped out. So here we are. We'll pick it up again today and see how far we can get. I can read for about 45 minutes and then I have to do some 7 minutes worth of morning chores. So you can come in and hang out with me while I read it, make comments, like our usual Mystery Science Theater 3000 effort. And let's see, let me pin the link to the top. There, it's done. Okay, so what did we learn yesterday? We learned that Charles Welch was born in 1880, and he was born in London, and he lived on the rough side of town. His father was not a drunk, but did inappropriately buy drinks for everybody at the bar from time to time, to where his income was unstable. He lost his job when there was a big shift in the economy. So they were not wealthy. And he went on about how all of his childhood play places, the neighborhood where he grew up, that had interesting smells and interesting buildings and bars and candle factories and shops and cheese shops and whatever. He did go on a bit about how it was blown up, the whole dang neighborhood. It was blown up when the Nazis bombed London in 1940, and he regretted it. He did say, there is upcoming in this story of his, of how important it was for him to meet Dr. Bullinger, because they worked together for a while. When Dr. Bullinger died, as I know the backstory, he took over the work that Dr. Bullinger had started. And one of the most famous efforts of Dr. Bullinger is something called the Companion Bible, which is the King James Bible with a bit of extra margin. And inside the margin of this King James Bible, there's a lot of notes correcting the translation and giving the reader some thoughts about what you are reading. So it's a commentary, I guess. I've never seen the Companion Bible. I've heard good things about it over the years. But anyway, when Dr. Bullinger died, Charles Welch took it over. And also, we learned so far that Charles Welch wrote over 50 books in his day. Okay, I guess that is a good enough recount of what we were reading yesterday. So let's pick it up. Where are we? Okay, page 40. No, let's go back to page 39. Between 1844 and 1845, that is between the ages of 4 and 5 years, I attended a private school, but I learned practically nothing. And I believe that my comment was that it was soppy. I was then sent to Harold's infant school, where I remained for about a year. Owing to the many scrapes I got into at that early age, my father provided me with a small diary in which the teacher was asked to write in the morning what the word good or bad. The first day went off well, but alas, the second day was disfigured by the word bad. I remember at the age of 5 standing outside the house trying to alter the word bad to good, an experiment in accommodating theology and textual criticism, which I discovered did not work. When my parents discovered to their horror that I had taken a dare and started doing a striptease in front of the class, they concluded that it was no use keeping me at such a respectable institution, but that I might go to the board school where discipline exercised by scholar and teacher might have some rewarding effects. So, at the age of 6, I entered Keaton Rhodes School and remained there until the age of 14, when I reached XVVI. I don't know what that means. Standard, XVVII standard, the highest in a school of that type. Some 4 years after, a little girl named Winifred Jeanette Clark, who lived right down on the waterfront, became a pupil at Harold's Infant School and later transferred to Keaton Road School and became a friend of my own sister, Kit. And ultimately, under the good hand of the Lord, became the loving and loyal partner, helpmeet, and fellow sharer in the good fight of faith. 2 certificates for scriptural knowledge dated 1887 and 1888 show that at the age of 7 and 8, I had become acquainted with the letter of the word, but still wonder why the authorities feel that such passages as "Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my name's sake" should be considered milk for babies. I certainly gained nothing spiritually from such exercises. Certificates for second standard 1888 and third standard 89 and fourth in 1890 on to the seventh and X seventh in 1893, accompanied with a certificate for alternative elementary physics at the age of 12, mechanics, drawing, and French in 1893 at the age of 13, give some idea of the progress made and the nature of the teaching given. George Powell was an old-fashioned headmaster who had wisdom enough, however, to give younger teachers a fairly free hand. It was this custom to put all boys who were down for punishment into a line and go down the line with a mock solemnity, saying with each cut of the cane, miserable sinner, miserable sinner. Do you get it? They were getting spanked in a line. And every time they got spanked with that cane, the guy would call him miserable sinner. A school chant at the time revealed no disrespect. However, as we sang, Mr. Powell's a nice old man. He tries to teach us all he can. Reading, writing, arithmetic, but he doesn't forget to give us the stick. When he does, he makes us dance out of England into France, out of France into Spain, all around the world and back again. At the annual prize given in 1889, when I was just turned 9 years old, a Queen Victoria medal was pinned on my breast. I had quite by accident not been late or absent from school for a year. This was repeated for 3 succeeding years, the fourth being marked by a special bronze. Someone said 4 consecutive years without being late or absent was not only a credit to the youngster, but to his mother, especially where there were younger members of a large family to be cared for. Those who are in the habit of attending the meeting at the chapel of the open book have no need to look anxiously at the clock. It is as dishonest to steal a person's time as his money. Little souls sometimes adopt Malvolio's idea of greatness. I frown the while, and perchance wind up my watch, or play with some rich jewel. But punctuality is the courtesy of kings. Memory is a strange thing, and it is difficult to understand where and how happenings of 70 years ago can be called to mind without effort. I can repeat without hesitation the names of the register in the class when I was 8 years old. There is an hiatus where daydreaming took the place of vigilance, but as my name came last in the alphabet order, all was well. Here is the list: Bilby, Butler, Breezeford, Breeze, Culling, Cush, Dunlap, Elms, Fleming, Gale, Hogg, Humphreys, Joy, May, ... Walker, Walling, Welch. To W.H. Talk must go the credit for keeping the school up to date in some manner of science. In 1894, at this LCC school, as it has become, I was initiated into the wonders of spectrum analysis, Newton's disk, photosynthesis, sound, light, heat, magnetism, and electricity, and have been surprised in afterlife to meet men who on the surface had received far better training than I, but who had not had so clear a conception of these elements of scientific research as has been part of the ordinary syllabus at Kenton's Road School. Kenton's Road School. The playground of the boys' section was partly open and partly covered. The building above being supported on the row of pillars, the Cyridox was naturally a target for enemy bombers. And in 1940 or thereabouts, about 200 rendered homeless by such an attack were were shepherded down to take shelter in the covered playground of the school. That night, a direct hit on the school buried that 200 souls, and not one, so far as I can discover, escaped. One wing of the school still functions, but the school I knew as a boy is no more. The picture drawn in January 1959 shows the conditions of the building that remain. There's the building. In 1894, when I was 14, I left school and sought some form of employment. In after years, when my parents were not so hard pressed, it was possible to give two of my younger sisters a college training. But although I longed for further and richer training, at the time was out of the question. I then answered an advertisement for intelligent lad, an advertisement for an intelligent lad, and entered a tea broker's establishment in Road Lane, EC. And there for a year, I ate my heart out as much as Dickens did in the blackening factory, for I hated, as many boys did, the homely chores that an eldest child perforce had to share. Here, someone in the city, to his shame, spent most of his time battling with never-ending mountains of china cups and pots used by the tea-time tasters of the firm. Occasionally, I paid a visit to such wharves as Butler's, Hayes, or St. Catherine's, but revolt at the age of 15, I gave up the princely salary of 5 shillings a week and was out of employment for 6 or 7 weeks, baffled but unbowed. Here I must again break the chronology sequence. At the age of 25, that is 10 years after being dismissed from Rood Lane, I was conducting a party around the British Museum and had been explaining some of the exhibits seen in the Egyptian room. As was always a possibility, a member of the public drew near and joined the party. At a halt in the lecture, I turned to him and said, "You evidently are interested." And he replied, "Indeed, I am." I added, "Do you not recognize me?" In astonishment, he said, "No." I slipped into the Cockney vernacular, saying, "You gave me the sack 10 years ago." He was the secretary of the firm and rejoiced at such transformation. Time's revenges need not always be saddening. Of course, a radical change had come about in those intervening 10 years, to which all the incidents of this narrative are all the while converging. As no opening had seemed to be forthcoming, my father, who was himself in the leather bag industry, said I had better take up the same craft. And so, when I was 15, started at Wolfsky and Company, leather bag makers, with whom I stayed apart from about 2 years at Supples, at Barbican's, and Jacobs in Wilson Street, until I left at age of 24 to take up the secretaryship of a Bible training college. Whether we be blue-blooded aristocrats or the lowest classless serf, our pedigree at least leads us back to one man through whom sin entered into the world. The clay out of which God fashions vessels for his service is the very same in every case. Wow, baby. Let's see if I can underline this. Annotate. Hang on a second while oh, it just gives me one line. Oh, I know, I can put a box around it. Rectangular, yeah, there we go. Okay, now let's check it out. Whether we be blue-blooded aristocrats or the lowest of classless serfs, our pedigree at last leads us back to the one man through whom sin entered into the world. That's a reference to Romans 5:12. The clay out of which God fashions vessels for his service is the same in every case. Beautiful. Upbringing and environment are instruments used in the shaping of the vessels, and in particular, the influences of parent, home, and school during the impressionable years of early youth. But by nature, a child is provided with two parents, but modern life often robs him of the balancing care of the father. A mother's love is immediate and protective. A father looks to the future and is corrective. Happy is the child who has both. It should be remembered that the scripture says, fathers, not mothers, bring up your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Ephesians 6:4, Colossians 3:21, and Hebrews 12:5-12. My father used to leave home early each morning, about 7 a.m., but we children still in our beds would hear the little ritual that was unfailingly observed. Goodbye, Mom. I'm off. Goodbye. Have you your bag, Dad? Yes, my dear. Dad would walk to Spa Road Station, now demolished, and take either a penny fare to London Bridge, or if extra weary, a 3 halfpence fare to Cannon Street Station, and then walk to Old Street, where he was employed. We saw no more of Dad until 8 o'clock at night, and those still young would by then have gone to bed. Looking back over the years with a sympathetic understanding, which only time could bring, I can see that in his own way, my father exercised an influence over his family of one boy and 6 girls that was not immediately obvious. I doubt whether he would have tried to give definition to the word philosophy. And yet, he had a simple nature, a wisdom that knew no parade, and often with self-deprecation, he had marked influence on a growing child. He would appreciate the rustic wit of Corin, the shepherd, in As You Like It. Touchstone, has any philosopher in thee, shepherd? Corin says, no more, but that I know the one sickens the worst. At ease he is, and that he wants money means, and content is without 3 good friends, that the property of rain is wet, and fire to burn, that good pasture makes fat sheep, that a great cause of the night is lack of sun, and that he hath killed, and that he that hath learned no wit by nature, nor art may complain of good breeding, and comes of a very dull kindred. Cool. As I have said elsewhere, I had no Christian upbringing. The scriptures were unknown. The gospel and its blessings like a language of a foreign land. Recognizing all this, I nevertheless cannot but be but help but let me get that right. I nevertheless cannot help but be grateful that my father did, according to his light, seek to play a father's part. How many boys of 12 have been taken aside and had the advice of old Paulinus read and explained to them? The passage is lacking in spiritual grace, yet, for what it's worth, think of the effect upon a schoolboy hearing for the first time such counsel as, "Look, thou character, give thy thoughts no tongue, nor any unproportioned thought its act. Be thou familiar, but by no means vulgar. The friends thou hast, and their adoption tried, grapple to thy soul with hoops of steel. But do not dull thy palm with entertainment of each new hatched, unpledged comrade. Beware of entrance into quarrels. Beware of entrance into quarrels, but being in Barrett, that thou opposest may beware of thee. Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice." Ooh, that's a good one. Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. Take each man's censure, but reserve thy judgment. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend, and borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thus canst not then be false to any man. Thou canst not then be false to any man. On one occasion he drew me aside and said, with a purpose to mock solemnity, "Boy, remember this. The most unlucky to fall down and break your neck. It's most unlucky to fall down and break your neck on Wednesday." By the time I had puzzled out the emphasis on Wednesday, I could say with intent, it is not in our stars. It is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings. My father also had a way of throwing into a conversation a simple but proverbial wisdom, a simple bit of proverbial wisdom. For example, when someone had been unduly stressing the obligation that young folk had to support their aged parents, he, to their surprise, said, "Young sparrows don't save up to feed old sparrows," and left it at that. Had such a proverb come from an undutiful son or daughter, it would have worn a different complexion. Without enlarging on this influence on young outlook, here are a few more samples of his rude yet very sane, kindly philosophy. When facing some adverse condition that threatens our peace as a family, he might say, "Oh, well, we never died in a winter yet." Or at a time when he had hardly a penny to bless himself with, he might sprinkle a riddle like this on us: "What's the difference between me and a millionaire?" The answer was, well, he has started on his second million. I've only started my first. Once at a tea table, he caught us all napping by springing on us the question, "Who killed Cain?" We all yelled out, "Abel." On page XII is a drawing I made of my father when I was about 19 and he was about 51 or 2. Two names were held in great respect in our homes and were familiar in our mouths as household words, namely Charles Dickens and William E. Hart Gladstone. My father continued the liberalism of his grandfather, of whom we have spoken on page 17. The fact that within 5 minutes' walk there was a ragged school of about 400 children, coupled with the further fact that the street was our playground, and that many of the boys with whom I mixed were little blackguards, but emphasis on overshadowing grace of the Lord in those formative years and unspiritual days. The streets, of course, were not so lined with traffic as they are today. The street sellers added a little to the otherwise drab surroundings. An old man would come along in tattered clothing with a little white toy lamb fastened to the brim of his hat, singing in a crackled old voice, "Young lambs to sell, young lambs to sell. If I'd as much money as I could tell, I would not be crying young lambs to sell." Another with a basket on his arm would walk around saying in a grumpy voice, all brown uns, Gravesend shrimp, all brown uns." Insecticides were unknown, but one man wearing an old top hat, to which was fashioned a sheet of sticky paper, could heard be selling, "Catch 'em alive! Oh, as through the streets fly paper I cry. The boys holler after me, bother your eye. Catch 'em alive! Oh, catch 'em alive." In Little Dorrit, Dickens, speaking about some old picture, says, "Such coats of varnish that every holy personage served as a flytrap became what is now called, in the vulgar tongue, a catch 'em alive." Oh, that's interesting. So he would glue or tape flypaper to his top hat so it would catch the flies so they wouldn't bother his eyes. I get you. On May Day, the streets would be festive and colorful as Jack in the Green paraded the streets. The name Jack occurs in many traditional settings: Jack and Jill, Jack the Giant Killer, Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack Horner, and Jack Sprat. Jack in the Green was a public holiday, also called Chimney Sweeper's Day. It appears to have been a remnant of the many sports and pastimes which old London was enlivened, and brought a touch of carnival into the lives of some that were as dingy as the chimney sweeps. The sweeps' color of their faces, for a change, was brick dust, trimmed by their hats with gilt paper, that's glit paper, and one of their number dance and capered inside a cone of evergreen. And there's his drawing about that matter. Isn't that kind of strange? In 1842, In 1842 and again 1864, Acts of Parliament made the employment of climbing boys, as they were called, illegal. Charles Kingsley in the Water Babies speaks of these climb boys. To these, the tablet referred to on page 20 alludes when it forbid the apprenticing of boys to chimney sweeps. On May Day in the morning, folks could walk in the green meadows and woods, and there would be a maypole dancing and divers, warlike show, and good archers and Morris dancers and other devices for pastime all day long. And toward the evening, they had stage plays and bonfires in the streets. A familiar cry was, "A lot for a halfpenny watercress," or it was usually pronounced watercresses. A mission that was under the railway arches of Spa Road Station stipulated that no one could be a member of the mission band who did not refrain from buying watercress on Sundays. Another chap would cry as he walked in from the surrounding country, "Any chickweed and groundsel for your singing birdies." Yet another would pedal from door to door. Oh, God. Good morning, brothers and sisters. Let me take a little break here and say it's 51 minutes past the hour. If you're new, I am reading Charles Welch's autobiography. So there. I did put the link to his autobiography in the show notes below, so you can go read it for yourself, see what you missed. It's a good read. It's more beautiful language, than our sloppy English grammar that we have today. It's a stretch. Stretching is good. Another old chap would cry as he walked from the surrounding country, "Any chickweed and groundsel for your singing birdies." Yet another would pedal from door to door, greeny gray lumps of hearthstone used for whitening doorsteps and hearths. Being the eldest, I was roped in at times to use this hearthstone and clean the front doorstep. As I did not want any of the boys to see me doing women's work, I knelt in the passage and hung nearly upside down to do this chore. When cleaning the knives in those days with brick dust, I sometimes asked who invented work. But at the time, I was ignorant of the reason for its irksomeness. There was no stainless steel at that time. However, we strike a pleasure note. However, we strike a pleasanter note as we remember the song, 16 branches a penny, sweet lavender. I will sell you 16 branches a penny, all in bloom. Oh, well, it doesn't sound like an exciting song. Again, there was something approaching the romantic to hear on a misty November evening the tinkle of the bell of the Muffin Man. Oh, so he carried muffins on his head. Another relic of old times persisted in the recurring periods when we built grotto in the curb. This was made of color paper and a lighted candle and a small stone. And the small stones and oyster shells. We had no idea that this was perpetuating a memory of pilgrimages, or that the oyster shells had any connection with St. James. After building the grotto, a boy would take an oyster shell and, keeping pace with the passerby, would chant, Please remember the grotto only once a year. Father's gone to sea. Mother's gone to fetch him back. Please remember me. I noticed that many passerby who contributed his penny never even saw the grotto that had been so carefully erected, and this gave me a brainwave. Retiring to another street, I built no grotto, but chanted the prescribed words and collected 4 pence, halfpenny. My financial experiment, however, horrified my mother at my duplicity, and so perhaps a financial wizard was lost to the city. I have been driven in a Cadillac and on several, and the 70 miles an hour seem but 30. I can remember such much more primitive ways of travel, however. One was a one-horse bus that left St. James Church. The passenger climbed aboard, put his penny in a glass-covered box, which was visible to the driver, and when all were seated, he pulled the cord, and away we went with a gentle clip-clop. No petrol, no honking, no hurry. What bad old times. Fancy. No zebras crossing. No stop. No signals. No go signals. And soon, with atomic energy, and space travel, we shall realize the experience predicted of the pilot who, quote, went out in a relative way and came home the evening before. Oh, that's cute. He went out in a relative way and came home in the evening before. If, as I have indicated, I owe much to the unobtrusive guidance of my father, I am equally indebted to the example and care of my mother. From her, I have inherited a horrible debt. Her example of supplementing the advice of old Polonius, already quoted. Father was easygoing, but mother was an organizer, and both were happy in their spheres. I placed beside the story of Barry's mother, when she became the proud possessor of 6 horsehair bottom chairs. 6 horsehair bottom chairs. Huh. And as he recounts in his book, Margaret Ogilvy, for many weeks, if not months, my mother would stand outside the furniture store in Jamaica Road. But what was passing through her mind, she told no one. At last, however, it was revealed when a furniture van delivered a bedroom suite paid for in cash. Up until then, a box covered with indemnity over pink cotton with a small swing mirror suffice. But when at last this transformation was achieved, what a day that was. We children were happy to have bare boards for a floor and blue washed walls. Mother, bless her, was now housed like a queen. Another light upon her character is associated with the annual holiday, with which we would never have been but for her careful budgeting. When the time drew near for arrangements to be made, I actually got time off daily work, and we went, both of us together, mother and son, to Ramsgate, Hastings, or some seaside place to decide on the apartments that must be booked in advance. I learned to anticipate the procedure. There's his drawing of apartments for rent. Armed with a number of addresses, her first move was to look at their curtains. If the outside inspection was not satisfactory, she would pass on to the next address until the test was passed. After coming to terms, her next move was to visit the shopping center where she would make a sort of slide rule. That tin of apricots is a halfpenny more than at home. That cut of beef is a penny more, and so on. In those days, no respectable family allowed sweethearts to go off on holiday together, and so mother very diplomatically catered for our own family and for any associates, which worked out happily for all. There was one Victorian attitude that I undertook to circumvent, although my sisters feared that I would not succeed. I was going to get mother to consent, hold your breath, to mixed bathing. After much coaxing, she consented to sit like Britannia in the middle of a curve in the beach, while father, who enjoyed the joke, fixed up a sheet with large stones over a depression in the cliff. There, the girls all undressed while the boys did the best they could at a distance. All went swimmingly until the time came to dress. And then we remembered the experience of King Canute. The tide had washed away the sheet, and there was nothing for it but that Dad and I had to wade in and rescue heaps of underclothing, dump them down at Mother's feet, and we all got dressed under her eye. But it was rare fun, in which she entered as heartily as the youngest of us. When the time came for me to make the great decision to give up a craft with an assured wage to take on unspecified Christian service, Mother was not at all comfortable. She assured me that the people with whom I was going to take advantage of, she assured me that the people with whom I was going would take advantage of me, and some of her fears, I must confess, were realized, although these good folk had assured me that they would treat me as though I were a son. However, that is all over and past. The good remains, and the meanness is forgotten. Okay. You want to come in and share testimony? Hit the link. I'll be back in about 3 minutes or 4 minutes. Okay, baby. Hang on, cutie boy. Hang on. Hang on again. I got to close the door. Yeah, there's all these little tricks, you know what I mean? Hello.
Hello, sire. Hello. Good reading. I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good coffee, good reading, good God. Big Perm wants to know why pray, why repent, why believe if it's all predestined. Well, if it's predestined for you to pray, pray, baby. Try to get away from prayer, Bucky. How's that for an answer?
I got to get a refill. I'll be back in just a few
Okay.
seconds. Thank you.
Okay, the Apostle Paul, again, boys and girls, let me recount the situation here. It's 10 minutes past the hour. We are attempting our way through Charles Welch's autobiography. Who was Charles Welch? He was a brother who started in the work long about 1910 or so. At first, he was with Dr. Bullinger, and he taught Dr. Bullinger something. He was in his 20s. I think this is the right story. He was in his 20s. And he came along and taught Dr. Bullinger, who was a great Bible scholar at the time. He presented the idea to Dr. Bullinger that everything before Acts 28:28 was very oriented toward the Jews, the circumcision gospel. And everything after Acts 28:28 is very much oriented toward this revelation of the secret, which has a hell of a lot to do with grace. Anyway, Dr. Bullinger listened to the presentation and said, oh my God, much of what I have written, I have to throw in the trash or rewrite because this is the truth. And affectionately, this type of teaching is called dispensationalism. That God does operate in various dispensations throughout time. He deals with humanity in one way, and then later on he deals with humanity in another way, and then later on he deals with humanity in another way. So we get Adam and Eve in the garden, and we get Cain and Abel and Seth and conscience and the law and government, human government, and the flood, and the story goes on. Christ shows up and he's rejected and crucified, and so God deals with humanity and Israel in various ways at various times. And right now It is our privilege to understand that God is dealing with humanity in a manner of grace, a grace that we just cannot wrap our heads around because it is so gracious. It has no strings attached, absolutely no strings attached. If God wants something out of us, God gives us that something. And God deals with all humanity spectacularly wonderful because of the accomplishments of Christ's work on the cross. And Brother Charles Welch was one of the early ones to see this in our, shall we say, expanded circle of friends. There might have been others to see it way back in the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s, but they, they didn't have the, shall we say, the capability of media. Like there might have been some guys who really observed grace way back, but how do you get the message out? The writers were few and far between because writing and paper was expensive at one time. Now look at us. We're prattling on YouTube. Good morning, Andy.
Good morning, Ace. How's my audio?
It's perfect.
Oh, didn't sound very good. Can you hear me okay, Ace? Am I breaking up?
You're doing just fine, buddy. Doing just fine.
Okay, just sounded a little bit sketchy. Yeah, that was all. Breaking up, like,
All right, I'm going to continue reading. Feel free to interrupt anytime, Andy, okay?
No, I just want to say I believe that Bob and Eric are actually universalists. And the reason why I say that is because I said I have no problem with the King James Bible. And when you go to 1 Timothy 2:4, it says, and I will have all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. So Bob is a universalist. And I would also say Eric is as well, because on one of his last videos, a short one, he said, we must stand on the Bible, on the scripture, on every word. Again, 1 Timothy 2:4. So he must agree with that, and I will have all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. So I do believe that these two people, without knowing it themselves, are universalists, just that they don't know it yet.
Yeah.
Or they're afraid to come out and say because of ridicule. You know, just like the early church did when they believed on Christ. They were ridiculed.
Uh-huh.
There we go. So I do believe, that they are universalists, and it just takes a bit of time to come out of the closet, I guess, and actually nail your colours to the mast. But they will, because they trust on the living. They trust on 1 Timothy 2:4, which is in the Bible. They both pretty much worship, by the way, especially Bob. Not so much Eric, but you go to any Bible translation, it pretty much says the same thing. Amen. I just thought I'd broadcast the very, very wonderful good news that Bob and Eric are now brothers, universalist brothers. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Never thought I'd see the day. put the cat amongst the pigeons there, eh? You can hear them now tapping away and making videos. Anyway, I'll shut up and listen, Ace. I hope you have a good day. You carry on, brother.
All right. The Apostle Paul, as far as we can gather from his writings, was a man of culture, and up to that time of his conversion, a man of independent means. He had, however, been taught a trade in accordance with Hebrew custom. He was a tent maker. Opinions differ as to whether this trade involved the process of weaving or not. But Chrysostom has no hesitation in speaking of the apostle after witnessing for the truth in a bazaar and market, sewing together skins of leather while demons trembled and angels marveled. Bimonse, at the time of my boyhood, had a worldwide reputation for leather, and it was not therefore strange that I too should find myself engaged in a craft in a worldwide reputation for leather. And it was not therefore strange that I should find myself engaged in a craft with the apostle himself, should I have taken an intelligent interest. I passed through the various phases of the craft, from the most delicate pocketbook work to the heaviest hand-sewn type, and to this day I value the balance that an ability to work with one's hand gives to anyone who is engaged in purely literary activities. But the mighty Paul, with his humble follower, would say, "These hands have ministered to my necessities." And there is his drawing of leather bags and such. One of the strange things in the Wheel of Time is that at the age of 18, I worked at a leather bag maker, Jacob and Sons, which is immediately opposite to the Chapel of the Open Book. But in that period, I was so lacking in interest concerning things spiritual that I have no recollection of ever seeing that a chapel stood there. Now my name can be read on the chapel. I notice on the chapel notice board from the very window at which I worked. About the time I must have driven my mother nearly crazy with attempts to arrange, rehearse, and dress amateur theatricals. During one bout, the back of the copper in the warehouse assumed the colors of the rainbow through the many packets of dye in preparing these costumes. One attempt stands out from many, which I will recall. It was planned that the scene from Shakespeare's Richard III, where Blackenbury has his interview with Clarence just before he was murdered in the Tower, should be enacted. To fit up a younger sister with a coat of mail presented a problem. I tackled it in this way: obtaining, I hope, honestly a vest and using a silver paper backed with calico, I cut out dozens of scales and patiently stitched them in overlapping rows to the vest. Having got so far, I felt a helmet was called for. So using a basin as a mold, I used a pasted brown paper bag and modeled it fairly presentable as a fairly presentable helmet. Then, to go on to perfection, I found Mother's black lead brush. I found Mother's black lead brush used for polishing the kitchen come from the tower. I don't understand. Anyway, but alas, when my range had made the brown paper mache helmet look as though it had sister. Sorry to struggle with this, but alas, when my range and made the brown paper mache helmet look as though it had struggled into this suit of mail, and it stretched to accommodate her shape, all the scales being very light stood on end like quills of the fretful porcupine, while this, together with an uncomfortable black lead smudge on the cheek, sent the audience into fits of laughter as the opening words were solemnly enunciated. "Oh, I have passed a miserable night, so full of horrid dreams and ugly sights, etc. This, however, by no means daunted our spirits, and when we came up again for more, I have before indicated that while we were as a family without God in the world, we were a happy family, kindly and generous, tolerant, and rigidly honest. My father was quick-tempered, so quick that before he was half through some explosive utterance, he would be all apology. I remember some hard words being uttered between my two parents, but in the night he came where I was sleeping to assure me that all was well and that he was forgiven. I find that I too cannot suffer fools gladly, so I have to count 10 when met by stupidity and obdurate opposition. Grace alone can cut through heredity. It was a quiet feature of home life to assemble in the parlor on Sunday evening while Dad read a chapter or two from one of Dickens' novels. Out of this, in the year 1899, came into existence a manuscript magazine called The Home Circle. I have before me the bound volume consisting of 642 handwritten pages, commencing September 1899 and concluding with June 1900. Apart from myself and an old school chum, no contributor except my two parents were above the age of 15, and some were less. The volume was fully indexed and much topical entries as the death of Gladstone, the siege of Mafeking, a girl's protest against homework, Midsummer Night's Dream at Her Majesty's Theatre, short stories, and a serial. A Poet's Corner, 10 articles on optics, give some range, and not one reference, however, can be found to Christ or the scriptures. One cannot refrain from quoting the contributions made by my mother in the closing number. Her schooling had been practically nil. At the age of 10, she was already engaged in glove making. And in June 1900, our family consisted of father, myself, and 6 sisters, so that my mother was hard pressed from morning to night to keep us all fed and clothed and clean. Dear editor, as it is the last magazine this season, I cannot write an article. I write to congratulate you on your undertaking, which I think has been a great success. I am exceedingly pleased with the work, and it has brought out knowledge which otherwise would have never been shown. I am sure the contributors have all done their best. Signed, Mother. I must retrace a few steps because it is necessary to envision something of the formative influence both the Bermondsey settlement and later the Tonybee Hall had on me. No spiritual benefit was either sought or found in these institutions, but he who planned the goal also superintended the fashioning of the earthen vessel, while my introduction into the Bermondsey settlement was to acquire a knowledge of Greek, the art classes, and the elocution and dramatic classes soon captivated my attention. And all this will be remembered after many hours of a bench and a long walk home. The art class was under the direction of Miss Beatrice Budget, a Slade scholar, and a relation of Dr. J. Scott Lidgett. From her kindly supervision, I not only made progress in drawing, but became acquainted to the gentler side of life. To this day, I can remember as she took the pencil from my hand to correct an error in my attempt at drawing from the cast of the Lorenzo Monument, that I first saw a manicured hand, no varnish, no staining of the fingernails, but a revelation of what could be beyond the grime and the struggle of a Bemonce environment. Miss Budget not only devoted her time to come down to Bemonce, but very graciously invited me to send her specimens of my drawings once a month for criticism. And there's one of his drawings. One letter reads, "I have shown your work to Professor Brown. He thinks it's very probable that it could be better for you not to attend a school of art, as in the government schools you may be obliged to do a great deal of unnecessary mechanical work in order to pass examinations. You would get on quicker if you worked alone, and from time to time sent me your drawings and paintings to be criticized." The interest that one and another took in the development of this Bemonce boy mitigated the otherwise frustrating pressure of the circumstance and kept him sweet. For all this care, he looks back with amusement, yet with gratitude. In the elocution class, I gained a prize for a paper on theory and played such parts as Shylock, Oberon, and King Lear. Fairly exciting for a youth of 19. In its value, however, was in the discipline of clear enunciation, proper gesturing, and overcoming a stage fright. Retracing our steps once more, at the age of 9, my finger was split open by a stroke of the cane I received, and for several weeks I enjoyed the privilege of excuse from all lessons and wandered about the school with my arm in a sling, to the evident envy of my schoolfellows. During this enforced idleness, I came upon the works of Shakespeare, and Macbeth in particular, and was completely enthralled. In 1910, I walked 3 miles from home to the Lyceum Theater, where I saw Henry Irving and Ellen Terry play Macbeth. And I found myself almost word perfect. To this day, the magic and majesty of language that could produce the line, "unto the last syllable of recorded time," still holds me in its grip. A year or more after I joined this settlement, I was attracted to visit Tonabee Hall in Whitechapel, and there became a member of the Art Student Club, of which Alfred Parsons, ARA, was president. Here I came under the influence of Mr. and Mrs. Hancock Nunn, a Cambridge man and his wife who devoted their lives to the betterment of folk like myself. I have responded to their kindness and was many times invited to spend a day at their lovely home in Roseland Grove, Hampstead. It was like being initiated into another world to sit down to a snowy white linen tablecloth, candlelight, and to be served by maids in caps and gowns, aprons. Again, music had a place as well as art, and I enjoyed singing such songs as "Where the Bee Sucks," and discovering much hitherto unrealized beauty that I should think that I owe more to these kind friends than to any other up to the age of 19 and 20. I should imagine I was what some would call an interesting kid. Upon returning home one day from being out with the fellow artists sketching, my father handed me a letter saying, "I think you are the only one who can answer this. Roslyn Grove, Hampstead, NW, March 3rd, 1900. Dear Mr. Welch, I am writing to you." So he's like 20 years old, and he's got the title Mr. already. That's way cool. Dear Mr. Welch, I am writing to you instead of speaking to directly to your son. Oh, it's written to his dad. I am writing to you instead of speaking directly to your son in order to save him from disappointment, if you may think my proposal quite impractical. We have at Toneby Hall a traveling club whose members travel some 40 or 50 together, obtain very much reduced charges at hotels and fares by rail. The Easter Club, consisting of men and women, students of Toneby Hall, is going to Venice and a few of the surrounding cities of Italy, passing through Belgium, Germany, and Switzerland. The treasury of the club invites, on behalf of his fellow members, one member of our club to accompany them as their guest. After carefully sounding several members of the club, and after much conversation, Mrs. Nunn and I think that your son would be the most suitable member to accept this invitation. We suppose that he would be unable on his own to afford the 12 guineas such an exposition would cost him. We gather that he is less bound with regard to his holidays than almost any other member, and we feel sure from what we know of him that he would bring to such an expedition as much study as he possibly could give, so as to reap the fullest benefit of the new world of things into which he would be introduced. At the same time, he has shown very much interest in art and has made rapid progress in his painting, that we feel he has earned the right to be considered first on such an opportunity as this. Of course, a young fellow might jump at an offer like this without considering whether it would not be unsettling. An offer like this without considering whether it would not be unsettling for him for his own work, and that he might risk his present situation for the sake of it. I want you to think it over with Mrs. Welch and let me know as soon as you can, because if he is not to accept, someone else may. If you think there is no harm in his going, tell him by all means. But if you think it is wiser for him not to go, say nothing about it. I am sorry Mrs. Nunn and I are not going with the party. It would have been an additional pleasure to have gone with your son, but several friends of ours will be going, and as far as the expedition itself is concerned, I feel sure he will get nothing but the best influences from start to finish. Away about 18 days from April 11th, with kind regards, in which Mrs. Nunn joins me. Charles Welch. I remain sincerely yours, Thomas Hancock Nunn. P.S. Going as the guest of the club, your son could manage on £1 or so just for odd meals, for which the club might not have contracted beforehand. If you care to see me about it and care to call a Tonaby Hall between 7 and 8 Monday, I should be glad to see you. That or come up here to supper tomorrow at 8:30. I approached the oversight of the leather workers where I was employed for permission to take the 3 weeks off that the expedition entailed, but was met with the objection, such opportunities do no good for you, and your place will not be kept open if you take time off. My immediate reaction was, I can get work at any time, but I shall never get an opportunity like this again. When I returned, the place was still open, all was forgotten, and when 2 years later I wished for time to go on a similar trip to Florence, this time paying my own expenses as a full member, the request was readily granted. There's the drawing of what? Tallower Show Florence. Okay, I don't know what that's about. I shall never forget the thrill of standing for the first time on foreign soil, reading foreign advertisements and drinking in all the sights and sounds of such a new venture. Our itinerary called for a stop at Lucerne and Milan on the way out and staying for 11 days in Venice, and stayed at Verona and Lugano on the homeward journey. I asked myself, what can I do to show my gratitude? And answered it myself by saying, I believe I shall say thank you best by enjoying every last minute to the full. And so it seemed did all and so it seems did all concerned. As my birthday falls on April 25th, I had my 20th birthday in Italy. And I had naturally never set foot in a hotel in my life, and had dinner of many courses that had never come my way. But no foolish shyness of thrusting forwardness marred the happiness of a never to be forgotten experience. I read before leaving Ruskin's Stone of Venice, and thrilled to stand on the little island of Torcello and read over again the chapter dealing with the humble origin of Venice. Again, no spiritual blessing accompanied this further experience, nor were such in mine, but the gentle condescension of these gracious people fitted me all unconsciously for otherwise intimidating experiences of a pioneer in spiritual things that were to shortly be mine. Looking ahead for a moment and following the following letter received from Dr. John Scott Liggett in the year the volume 12 of the Berean Expositor was published is of interest. Okay, January 19th, 1922. Again, brothers and sisters, we are reading the testimony for the autobiography of Charles Welch. I hope you're enjoying it. Give me a thumbs up. Dear Mr. Welch, January 19th, 1922. Dear Mr. Welch, you will forgive my dictated letter. I have been trying to write with my own hand, but the pressure of work is such that I find it impossible to do so within any reasonable time. I cannot tell you how great was the thankfulness and pleasure your letter gave to me. To have such testimony borne to help the settlement gave you in your early years is indeed a source of satisfaction. and comfort to me. To render such help has ever been my hope, even in regard to those portions of our work here which may seem most secular. Moreover, all my practical work here has sprung naturally out of the theology I have tried to set forth in my books. I am so glad to hear of what you have been doing and are doing. May you be enabled to carry on and be made an instrument in growing good to all those who come under the influence of your publications. I will do my best to let those you mention know what you tell me about the help they gave you. The lady who taught you Greek was, I believe, Mrs. Lomas. She died almost more than 13 years ago. Mrs. Budget is a cousin of mine, and I will tell her Mr. Jones ceased to be connected with the settlement before the war, and I have not been in touch with him for more than 3 years. I am still keeping on through my colleagues, though my colleagues, for the most part, have passed out of reach, and the death of my son, who was my mainstay and who was killed in the war, has left me very lonely. Forgive this imperfect letter, which is a most inadequate expression of my most grateful thanks to you for your kindly writings to me and for what you say. With all the best wishes, believe me, yours very sincerely, J. Scott Lickett. Bremonse Settlement on Jamaica Road. Wow. Back it up and listen to that again. That was a beautiful letter. And I guess that's the drawing of Venice. The following attempt to put into verse something of the feelings aroused the first acquaintance with Venice was originally written for the Home magazine already spoken of. Mrs. Hancock Nunn commented on this effort and said everyone who visits Venice under 30 wants to write a poem. The reference to love and peace and eternity was not because I had at that age of 20 either the hope or knowledge of salvation, but these sentiments were included as poetic conclusions to give an artistic finish. And it's called Venice the Fair. Beauteous still art thou in decay. Beauteous still art thou in decay. Thy beauty yet outshineth living states. It seems thou art destined by the fate to be for aye. Thy streets of glistening green, thy paths of sea, the mirror skies that crown thy glorious head on mid-blue or even golds and red, but jewels for thee, yet not as ropes of pearl on beauty's breast that heave and sink with every living breath, but still and cold like jewels bedecking death or marble's crest. The heart that once within thee swelled with pride at conquering galleys or victims' arms, respond no more to triumph or alarms or wash of tide. Thou lion of gold, who from thy field of blue lookest down, but on this motley jostling throng, where thy loyal sons and freedom's song and heart so true. No more with music and with solemn rite, this wondrous sea and Venice plight their troth, and blind themselves to each with solemn oath, to rule with the might. So what shall we see? So what see we? A picture of the past, a lovely picture, but a picture still, of eyes undimmed, a heart that knows no thrill, nor ever downcast. And so with all thy work, thou dost lack that touchstone of life, without which all must fail to shine, and which our tears do not avail, or yet bring back. Thy life is sweet isle gone, thy life's sweet isle is gone, and soon shall be shared in thy sight, and trouble too shall cease. And when shall we find the land of lovely peace? Eternity. The reader will have gathered by now that much as I have reveled in an opportunity to have had a college education under such an all-wise providence was denied me. At the same time, I wish to leave on record my deep indebtedness to a Cambridge man, Mr. Thomas Hancock Nunn, whose kindly interest has already been mentioned in these pages, and although the connection with Cambridge itself may be tenuous, the accompanying sketch of a well-known feature of the university may be permitted. And there is the well-known sketch of Cambridge. And there's another one. Oh, that's Oxford. Although through the mediation of Mr. Nunn, Oxford had also a share in opening my eyes to higher things, as I was invited to spend a long weekend with an Oxford don and realized the great gulf that seemed to be fixed between all that had gone to make up my life and the outlook and prospects of those more favored. I was impressed with the venerable aspect of the Bodleian Library. Little dreams then that in later years in the Bodleian would be sending a request that all my books should be placed on its shelves. The sketch of Magdalen, like the one of Cambridge, is inserted to be a reminder of these early years. One strange experience that I remember vividly was lunch on the top of Magdalen Tower. There's Magdalen Tower, and he had lunch up there. It has been my lot to discover that my writings have led some readers to conjure up a vision of an elderly, scholarly, venerable gentleman, to quote one reader, in order that there shall be no doubt that the earthen vessel whose fashion was occupied us of this record should be seen as a very homely, ordinary, unpretentious fellow. We will make our next entry one that is anything but highbrow. The first example is a copy of a postcard sent home and will give some indication of the relationship established between father and daughter and the method adopted to stimulate inquiry. Dear Ruth, why would Troitwich be the place for which you were a pickle? Why would Droitwich be the place for which you? Why would Droitwich be the place for you when you are a pickle? See the encyclopedia. Please tell Mummy I hope to write this afternoon. My love to 4 sweethearts now, Dad. Charles H. Welch. Finally, we made it to page 60. Got 40 pages left to go, baby. The
Good
other
God.
is that, say that again.
Oh, I said, good God, celebrating your excellent goal setting. Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
The other is a postcard in lighter vein from Ellery Robinson announcing the birth of their little boy, of their little son, and my reply in kind, which did not in the least lessen our intense concern for the truth entrusted to us both. Here on the farm, we've been getting lots of new things lately. 50 fuzzy white baby chickens, 5 little kittens as cute as the dickens, then 4 baby robins in a nest on the wall, and nice 9 hungry piggies that we sure can squall. But these things are above. But these things above are just incidental and not what we really want to tell you at all. For the biggest and the biggest, for the best and the biggest and the cutest edition, who is with mother, is perfect condition, is David John announcing, I arrived 2:40 p.m. I weigh 9 pounds, 6 ounces, and stand 22 inches tall. Don't want a thing except for you to know that I am here and that my dad and mom are Elroy, and Dorothy. Okay, I'm going to read that again. So this is the announcement of a baby that has been born, okay? To show you that there were some people back then who were clever with words. They wrote a funny poem to announce their baby's birth. All right? Maybe it will inspire you.
I've heard about those. Gender reveal poetry or something, but yeah, cool. I'm ready.
Okay, here on the farm, we've been getting lots of new things lately. 50 fuzzy white baby chickens, 5 little kittens as cute as the dickens, then 4 baby robins in a nest on the wall, and twice 9 hungry piggies that sure can squall. But these things above are just incidental and not what we really want to tell you at all. For the best and biggest and cutest addition to his mother, who with his mother is in perfect condition, is David John announcing, I arrived at 2:20 p.m. May 6. I weigh 9 pounds, 6 3/4 ounces, and stand 22 inches tall. I don't want a thing except for you to know that I am here and that my dad and mom are Elroy and Dorothy. Okay. To this poetic effusion, we replied in kind as follows. How nice to arrive where the kittens are 5 and fuzzy white chickens are 50. It must seem very fine when the pigs are twice 9 and the 4 baby robins are nifty. You seem very tall and you cannot be small. In fact, you appear to be weighty, and we send you our love, and we hope you now prove that the total now adds up to be 80. And that total Now and then from Mr. and Mrs. Charles Welch. And then Elroy says, I love your reply, such adroitness in rhymes, your versatile mind in poetic lines. Pray tell me what muse you has your cold on the floor, for it seems you have talent and talent in store. We had this treasure in earthen vessels, and the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. 2 Corinthians 4:7. When it pleased God to reveal his son. Oh, finally, brothers and sisters. Now he's going to get down to business. This section is when it pleased God to reveal his son. Do you remember this phrase? It's from Galatians. When it pleased God to reveal his son in me, then all hell broke loose. Okay. When it pleased God to reveal his son. The time is now approaching when the spiritual crisis took place for which all this previous preparation was permitted. A veritable road to Damascus. And yeah.
Oh, did I hear you solicit testimonials earlier?
Yeah, you got one?
About the revelation of our Lord Jesus Christ?
Go ahead.
Okay. I was riding down 7th Avenue in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I believe, if my memory serves, that God and the Lord Jesus Christ revealed themselves to me. And I said, God, if you're good, I think I might want to worship you. And I said, Jesus, if you're the truth, I think I might want to worship you. But anyway, that's about it. Happened to me, and that's the end of my testimony. I was triggered by what you said about the revelation of God. So anyway, thank you, Ace.
Sure, baby. Sweet little testimony there. At the top of the hour, here we go. When it pleased God to reveal his son, the time was now approaching when the spiritual crisis took place for which all this previous preparation was permitted, a veritable road to Damascus. It was while I was seeking a special grammar in Booksellers Row stand, now entirely vanished, that a bill was put in my hands by a young man bearing some such notice as the following: Skeptics and the Bible. An address will be given on the above subjects by Dr. W.L. Mundall, Exeter Hall, Strand. And there's a picture of Booksellers Row. It must be admitted that the word skeptics and not the word Bible drew me to that meeting. In November, in the year 1900, and it was with amazement that I listened to a man who was most evidently sane and scholarly, actually maintaining that the scriptures were true. As further meetings were announced, I inquired of Dr. Munhall, as we were leaving, what his subject would be on the succeeding evening. We have the good old gospel, was his reply. Now, may it scarcely seem possible, but I did not at the time really know what the quote-unquote gospel meant. And all the next day I hesitated. What's the use of wasting my time? Perhaps it would be fair to let him speak for himself. But overruling the mercy of God, who at the time was unknown and unloved, I went to the meeting where, quote, the good old gospel was preached. And the text taken from the Gospel of John, he that believeth on the Son hath everlasting life, and I passed from life unto death upon believing that simple testimony. I had no views on any doctrine of the Scriptures, such terms as atonement, justification, reconciliation, and the like were as the words of a foreign tongue. I had no concern as to whether John's gospel was or was not for the present period. All I know is that it was blessed to my eternal salvation. This was my road to Damascus, as sudden and complete as was. As sudden and complete. Where am I? As sudden and complete as was the conversion of Saul of Tarsus. At the close of the gospel message, Dr. Mundall quoted Romans 10, verse 9, and called anyone who believed with the heart to follow by making a confession with the mouth. With great trepidation, I responded and acknowledged the Savior. As I stood there feeling none too comfortable, Dr. Mundall gave the final word. This is not a matter of feeling. There may be occasions subsequent when you will not feel safe or saved, but this is a finished transaction based upon a finished work. How do you like them apples? Hang on a second while I bring up a box, because this looks like a good little.
They're pretty yummy.
Okay, now it's highlighted with the box. Ready? This is not a matter of feeling. There may be occasions subsequently when you will not feel safe or saved, but this is a finished transaction based upon a finished work. Thus started a new life, a new prospect, and a new goal. Upon reaching home after hearing the opening lecture on skeptics and the Bible, I had rehearsed the address with my father. Now, as I journeyed home, I realized I had something fuller and perhaps more decisive to discuss, and it would have been true of myself, as it had been of the apostle to observe angels could have said for the first time, "Behold, he prayeth." Once again, the message was repeated to my father and added the message. Once again, the message was repeated to my father with the added personal comment, "I believe and I have life." I needed no persuasion to make me attend the third meeting of this series. I was only too conscious of my abysmal ignorance of the very elements of this revealed truth. Again, the preacher made known in very simple terms the way of salvation, and again he quoted Romans 10:9, and made his appeal. I was naturally interested to see who would respond as I had done the evening before. And to my amazement and joy, I looked around to see my father with a face white with emotion, standing to acknowledge the same Savior and Lord. Here was a first fruits indeed, and here commenced a faith of lovely simplicity that lasted until my father's death in his 90th year. Wow. My dear mother, in the course of time, the younger members of the family were brought by various ways or different instruments to a saving knowledge of Christ. Light had dawned in that Bimonse home, and soon the consciousness of calling and commission was to make its urgent voice heard. For the moment, let us pause and be grateful and gratefully acknowledge the wondrous grace that could save and enlighten those who were so darkened and dead. The fact that straight away after his conversion, the Apostle Paul could preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God, see Acts 9:20, or, as in verse 22 adds, proving that this is the very Christ, shows that before conversion, his knowledge of the law and the prophets accorded with his zeal. True, as a Pharisee, he had imbibed the tradition of the elders, which stultified much of the scriptures, a veil which could only be removed by an act of grace. Yet it was evident that at his conversion, Paul was well stored with biblical knowledge. And in the case of the present writer, it was so. In the case of the present writer, after conversion, a most lamentable lack of the raw material of the Christian faith and witness was evident. Nearly 21 years of age, the Bible had been a closed book. Those responsible for the gospel campaign that had resulted in my conversion very wisely followed those gospel meetings with a series of expository lectures given by an able Bible teacher, Dr. W.H. Griffin Thomas. The very first of these studies was in the Gospel of John, and I became acquainted for the first time both with the facts of the gospel and with the excellent method of presenting the truth. Although it is 48 years since these lectures were given, I can remember as vividly as the night I first heard Griffin Thomas speak how he introduced the teaching of John's gospel. He said, John's method seems to be a truth made known, which was followed by a division among the hearers. This he made visible by the outline revelation, reception, rejection. John chapter 1, verses 6 through 12. Nothing could be simpler, though in many ways such an outline left much truth was untouched. Yet it came upon my susceptible and open mind with freshness and force, a good omen of richer and fuller analytical studies that were to be made. The 4 printed sheets giving the analytical outline of these studies in John's Gospel are before me as I write 48 years after they were delivered and are treasured still. Next to my conversion, they mark the most decisive step in my early Christian experience. Anticipating the story of the Berean expositor a little, we refer the reader to volumes 2 and 3, reprinted in 1926. Where correspondence can be found under the initials JHGT. On several occasions, W.H. Griffith Thomas submitted questions and published the answers given in the Berean Expositor in his own publications. I felt it was nothing less than his due that WHGT should know that the editor of the Berean Expositor, whose replies he was treating with respect, owed something to the lectures that he gave immediately after the gospel campaign in Exeter Hall. We produced his letter in reply. Telephone number, January 3rd, 1913. Dear Sir, thank you for yours of December 16th. I hope the editor of the Morning Star will insert something from you in reply to the passage in question. It is exceedingly interesting to me that to have your testimony to those in Exeter Hall Bible readings in 1900. To God be all the praise. I have read with great interest your various contributions to Things to Come and the Berean Expositor. I also have your book, Dispensational Truth. I am unable to follow you fully, but I have great sympathy with much that you bring forward. Very truly yours, W.H. Griffin Thomas. This is one of 5 letters received from this fine student of the Word. We will not produce them here, but give 1 or 2 excerpts that show with what intelligent and sympathetic interest WHGT read the articles in the Berean Expositor. Letter dated December 2nd, 1915. Thank you very much for yours of November 5th and enclosures. I read all of your articles with great interest and am particularly partial to anything in the way of Bible structures, having learnt to look for those from our good friend Dr. Bullinger. I shall be glad if you will send me from time to time anything that you issue which does not appear in the Berean Expositor, and I will at once remit any cost on hearing from you about it. And then in May 10th, 1917, he says, just a line to say that I hope you are going to give us a thorough treatment of Philippians 3:11, especially the apparent hypothesis, quote, if by any means I might attain. I am frequently asked questions on this text, and although I have looked pretty carefully to what our beloved old friend Dr. Bullinger has said in Things to Come, I cannot say I have been able to find an interpretation which meets satisfactorily the thought which many minds is suggested by the text. Perhaps, however, all this has been dealt with in your promised article in the May number. And then here's a letter dated May 29th, 1917. I wish you would come in some way or other. I wish you would in some way or other justify your view of Acts 125 on page 74 of your May number. I cannot find it supported by any commentator. And so far, I can see the twofold use of the place makes the reference of the second far more natural to Judas than Matthias. Your interpretation of the passage as a whole is quite strong and convincing enough without this. There was a time when I was among those who thought Peter had made a mistake, but I have long been convinced of the general line of your article. Let me add that your suggestion on page 78 about John 6:29 is most interesting. Here was a scholar, the late principal of Wycliffe College, Oxford, the principal of Bible College in Ontario, not only reading the Berean Expositor as one magazine among many, but reading it with interest, intense interest, and manifesting that interest by continual correspondence. It was surely an evidence of a great grace, knowing that the history of the editor, as he did, Griffith Thomas, continued to read with interest the articles and books that came from his pen. It was equally an evidence of the great grace that one with so few qualifications should have been thus called and equipped. But this story of the Berean expositor is one of all sufficient, overwhelming, sovereign grace from the beginning. And this testimony is but an echo of the apostles' words, by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace, which is bestowed upon me, was not in vain. 1 Corinthians 15:10. At the south end of Drummond Road, the sky was fretted by two distinctive towers of Peake's Breen's Biscuit Works. Let's see how far this goes. Okay, I'm going to stop it there. What page? We're on 64. And I'm going to hightail it out of here. We'll come back and pick it up later. It's 18 minutes past the hour. Thanks for joining me, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, dudes and dudettes. Give me a thumbs up and leave comments about this matter. This is a rare treat. You're not going to find across the YouTube platform very many places where you can find any old reading of old books, that is, and I think it's probably, you'll never find another reading of Charles Welch'S autobiography. Anyway, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me. And I will put a after show link in just for hoots for a little while. Grace to you.